That evening, the yard was finally empty. No slammed gates, no sharp voice shouting across the fence, no barking dog chasing imaginary boarders. Just the rustle of leaves and the soft creak of the old swing under the apple tree that had once given shade to both houses. Galina stood at her kitchen window, watching the padlock on the gate that used to be open for all the neighbors. Tomorrow, that lock would disappear. Not because she begged, not because she cried, but because the very papers her neighbor had ignored would turn the queen of the yard into an ordinary trespasser. Hello, dear friends. I'm Sarah Mitchell, and this is a new story about revenge and justice. Don't forget to like, comment and subscribe for more emotional life stories. Before the war over the yard began, Galina Petrovna's life was as measured as the ticking of the clock in her hallway. She was 70, a retired music teacher, living in a small house on the edge of town. Her days started early, kettle on the stove, the smell of black tea and homemade jam, morning exercises to the sound of birds and an old radio playing classical music. The wooden floor in the kitchen creaked in familiar places, the curtains smelled faintly of laundry soap and summer. Most of all, Galina loved the yard. Two small houses stood side by side, sharing a long strip of land behind them. Once, it had belonged to one family, then it was divided, but the yard remained common property for both owners. A simple gate in the low fence connected their halves. There were shared flower beds along the path, a place for clotheslines, and, at the very back, an old apple tree whose branches stretched over both plots like an umbrella. For decades, everything was peaceful. Neighbors helped each other shovel snow, exchanged cucumbers and jars of pickled tomatoes, and borrowed tools without counting every nail. Children played under the tree, adults drank tea on benches in the shade. Then the old neighbors moved away, and a new owner arrived, Olga. Olga was in her 50s, loud, energetic, always in a hurry. She arrived with a car, a dog and a plan to bring order to this outdated place. Galina baked a pie, carried it over and introduced herself. "Welcome, dear," she said. "If you need help with anything, just knock. We share the yard here, like family." Olga accepted the pie with a quick smile. "Thank you. I love order. We'll make this yard beautiful." At first, Galina believed her. She continued watering her flowers, hanging laundry, feeding birds. But over time, she noticed small changes. Olga moved her grill closer to the center of the yard. She started leaving her dog's toys everywhere. She began complaining about Galina's old lilac bushes, saying they took up too much space. The first real blow came one morning when Galina stepped outside with her watering can and stopped in shock. Her two young plum trees, planted 5 years earlier near the fence, were gone. Only rough stumps remained. She rushed to the fence between the plots. Olga was standing there with pruning shears and a satisfied look. "What happened to my trees?" Galina whispered. "They were on my side," Olga said simply. "They cast shade on my vegetables. I asked the gardener, and he said they were no good anyway. I decided to remove them." "They were on the border," Galina protested. "We planted them together with the previous owners." "Previous owners are gone," Olga replied. "And you should have asked permission to plant them in the first place." She wiped her hands and walked away, leaving Galina staring at the stumps, at 5 years of careful watering, at future jam and compote now turned into firewood. Something fragile inside Galina cracked. The trees were only the beginning. Soon after, Olga began hanging new signs on the fence: "Private property, no entry." She installed a metal gate with a heavy lock at the entrance to the shared yard. Where there had once been a simple wooden latch anyone could open, there was now cold metal and a chain. Galina discovered this the hard way. One rainy afternoon, returning from the market with bags in both hands, she tried to open the usual gate, and hit the lock. She knocked. Olga appeared at the window. "Olga, dear, I can't get in," Galina called. Did something break? Nothing broke, Olga said coolly. I locked the gate. Too many people walk through our yard. I don't like strangers. But I'm not a stranger, Galina protested. I've always used this path. It's the shortest way from the bus stop. You have your own entrance from the street, Olga replied, turning away. Use it. This yard is mine now. Galina had to drag her heavy bags around the block in the rain. The next day, she went to talk to Olga calmly. Olga, you know the yard is shared, she began, holding out a copy of the old plan of the property. Here, it shows. I know perfectly well what it shows, Olga snapped, pushing the paper away. Those old documents mean nothing. I pay for repairs, I mow the grass, I take care of everything. You don't. So I decide. If you want to walk here, ask me and I'll open the lock. I'm not a guest, Galina whispered. I've lived here 40 years. Then maybe it's time to learn some respect, Olga said, slamming the door. The lock stayed. Then came the important meeting. A few weeks later, the Homeowners Association announced a gathering to discuss the yard and future repairs. Galina planned to go, she ironed her dress, prepared notes about the shared property and decided to speak calmly, without anger. On the day of the meeting, however, she woke up with a pounding headache and a fever. The doctor she called shook his head. You can't go anywhere today. Stay in bed. Galina phoned the association chairwoman, apologizing that she couldn't attend. We'll handle it, the woman said briskly. A few days later, Galina learned what "handle it" meant. At the meeting, only Olga had come from their house. She had loudly complained about constant interference from the elderly neighbor, about dangers of open access, and about needing to formalize boundaries. Without Galina present to object, the group had voted to let Olga temporarily manage the yard, trusting her to keep order. A note was made that no one else had expressed interest. Olga treated this like a royal decree. She began parking her car right in the center of the shared courtyard, blocking Galina's old garden path. She put up a shed that leaned onto the fence, taking over even more space. She told delivery men, "Don't listen to the old lady, this is my yard." When Galina tried to protest, Olga waved a copy of the meeting minutes in her face. "The association gave me responsibility," she said. "You didn't bother to come. That's your problem." That night, alone in her kitchen, Galina cried over her cooling tea. For the first time, she considered selling her house and moving to an apartment. "What's the point of a yard I can't use?" she muttered. "She's already acting like I'm just renting space from her." But somewhere under the hurt, a quieter thought formed. There was a time before her, and there will be a time after. This yard has a history, and papers remember what people want to forget. Galina had been a music teacher all her life, not a lawyer. But she knew two things well: how to read, and how to be patient. She started with the folder of old documents her late husband had kept in the wardrobe. Late into the night, she sat at the kitchen table, glasses on the tip of her nose, sorting through yellowed contracts and maps. She found the original purchase agreement for their house, and, attached to it, a detailed cadastral plan of the land. It clearly showed two houses sharing one rectangular yard. The boundary line ran only between the houses, not down the middle of the yard. In the margin of the plan, the previous owner had added a note in neat handwriting: common use of yard and access path to be preserved by all future owners. Galina's heart beat faster. She dug deeper and found a copy of a decades-old decision from the local council confirming this arrangement after a dispute between the first two families. The decision stated plainly, the courtyard and access path are considered joint property. Neither party may restrict passage or usage without written agreement from the other. Olga either didn't know this, or hoped no one else remembered. Galina made copies of everything at the post office: the plan, the decision, the purchase agreement. Then she called her distant nephew, who worked in a municipal office. He came by that weekend, drank tea, listened, and frowned. "Aunt Galina, she has no right to lock the gate," he said. "The meeting of the association can't override a registered property decision. They can agree on rules, but not erase ownership. If you want, I can help you file a complaint." Galina smiled sadly. "I don't want a war. I want justice. And I want her to understand that I am not just some old woman she can shut out." Her nephew thought for a moment. "Then we do it properly," he said. "Step 1. We send a formal letter demanding she remove the lock and stop blocking the path, with copies of the documents. Step 2. If she refuses, we go to the land registry inspector and the association. They'll have to correct their mistake. And step 3, he grinned. "Well, step 3 you'll decide yourself, Aunt Galina." Galina nodded slowly. A plan was forming in her mind, not cruel, but sharp and dignified. When the letter was ready, she walked to Olga's door and handed it to her directly. "What is this?" Olga asked, frowning at the official stamp. "Just papers," Galina said calmly. "The same ones that existed long before your signs and locks." Then she went back to her kitchen to wait. Olga didn't react quietly. The next morning, Galina heard her furious voice outside, arguing on her phone. "This is nonsense," Olga shouted. "Some ancient paper? I manage this yard now." But the law office had already stamped the letter. 2 weeks later, an inspector from the land registry arrived, along with the association chairwoman. They walked the yard, measured fences, compared them to the old plan. Galina watched from her porch, heart pounding. Olga followed them, gesturing wildly, insisting the meeting decision gave her full control. At the end of the inspection, the official closed his folder. "The documents are clear," he said. "This yard is joint property. You have no right to lock the common gate or cut trees planted on the boundary without your neighbor's consent. The Homeowners Association overstepped its authority by granting you exclusive control." The chairwoman flushed. We just wanted someone responsible." The inspector pointed at the padlock. "This must be removed. And the path cleared. If it isn't done voluntarily within 10 days, we issue a fine and file a violation report." Olga stared at Galina, eyes blazing. "You did this," she hissed later, cornering her by the fence. "I reminded them what was already written," Galina replied quietly. "You tried to erase me. The yard remembers otherwise." Olga snarled. "You think one inspection changes everything? I still live here. I'll make your life miserable." Galina looked at her calmly. "No. You will make your own life miserable." She went back inside, leaving Olga fuming. True to the inspector's warning, the padlock came off a few days later, not willingly, but with much cursing and banging. Olga moved her car away from the center of the yard, dragged her shed slightly back onto her own official territory, and stopped telling couriers that Galina doesn't matter. But Galina's revenge wasn't finished. At the next homeowners meeting, which she attended healthy and prepared this time, the inspector's report was read aloud. The association had to admit they'd made a mistake. Several neighbors who had once admired Olga's decisiveness, now murmured about her ignoring the law and cutting down someone else's trees. Galina stood up, her hands steady. She didn't shout. She simply said, "I do not want anyone punished. I only want the rules to be the same for everyone. We share this yard. Let's remember that before someone else decides to raise a fence across it." Her calm words made more impression than any anger. The association voted to remove from the minutes the clause giving Olga management of the yard. A new rule was written: all changes in common areas had to be approved by both house owners in writing. Olga sat stiffly, lips pressed, the authority she'd enjoyed slipping from her fingers. From that day on, every time she wanted to change something in the yard, move the path, plant a bush, install a light, she had to come to Galina's door and knock. "Galina Petrovna," she would say through clenched teeth, "I need your written consent." Sometimes Galina agreed. Sometimes she smiled and said, "No, I like it the way it is." Either way, the power dynamics had reversed. The woman who had once locked the gate now found herself waiting for signatures from the neighbors she tried to shut out. That was Galina's favorite part of her revenge. She didn't have to raise her voice. Reality itself did it for her. Months passed. The yard, freed from the lock, once again became a place for both houses. Children from nearby homes cut through on their way to school. Galina hung laundry on her line without feeling like an intruder. The old apple tree grew new branches where the plums had been, and in the spring, its blossoms smelled just as sweet on both sides of the fence. Olga grew quieter. The neighbors who once praised her energy now crossed the yard with polite distance. Stories traveled fast, about the illegal tree cutting, the blocked path, the official fine she had eventually received for damaging shared property. She wasn't a villain in a movie, just a woman who had let arrogance carry her too far, and had been firmly pulled back. One evening, as Galina was watering her flowers, Olga approached the fence. She looked older than she had a year before. "I shouldn't have cut your trees," she said abruptly. "They were pretty." Galina paused, then nodded. "And I shouldn't have let you walk all over me for so long." We both learned something. Olga gave a humorless smile. "That you have more patience than I do. And better paperwork," Galina added gently. They both almost laughed. They never became close friends, but the open hostility faded. Olga stopped acting as if the yard were her personal kingdom. She began sweeping the common path sometimes without announcing it to the world. Galina, in turn, shared a jar of jam made from the apple tree one autumn, not as a sign of surrender, but as a sign that justice didn't have to end in permanent hatred. Years later, Galina often sat on the old bench under the apple tree, a mug of tea warming her hands, and watched the small life of the yard unfold. Children played with a ball, a cat tiptoed along the fence, neighbors carried groceries, greeted each other, exchanged small news. No one needed a special key to pass. No one claimed that the shared earth under their feet belonged to them alone. She thought about how close she had come to giving up, to selling the house and moving to a cramped apartment, just to avoid conflict. All because someone louder than her had decided that kindness meant weakness and silence meant consent. In the end, her revenge had not been about ruining Olga. It had been about restoring balance, reminding everyone, including herself, that agreements written long ago still had weight, and that even the quietest person can defend their space without shouting. The yard remained what it had been meant to be, shared. Olga lived on, more cautious, a little humbled. Galina lived on, more confident, a little prouder. Every time she walked freely through the once locked gate, she felt a small, private victory. Because evil, the kind that begins with "this is all mine now," eventually circles back to those who plant it. And truth, like that stubborn apple tree, can survive more than one harsh cut and still bloom again. Thank you for listening. Do you think she went too far, or did she simply take back her justice? Share your thoughts in the comments.